What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the TCG Empire YouTube channel. Today we are going to go over Tech Tuesday. If you're new here and you're not sure what Tech Tuesday is, it's where we take the deck of the week and we talk about some ways in which we could make it better, or potentially cards that you can play in your deck in order to make the matchup better. Now this week we did talk about Lugia VSTAR, so we're going to talk about some cards that probably are good to play right now that'll do well against it. Now today, as you can see, we do kind of have a different overlay, and we do have my buddy Zach here. He's one of my best friends. Zach, why don't you introduce yourself real quick for the people who didn't watch last week?
Hey guys, I'm kind of like the man behind the screen, you know. I'm the one that Tyler goes to for all of his like meta knowledge, and I'm usually the one that he's playing against. So, just keep in mind that when you watch his videos, I'm usually somewhere in there. I'm also in the process of working on my own YouTube channel called Best of 3 TCG. Hoping to get some content out on there soon. So feel free to go ahead and check that out, as I'm sure you guys will not be disappointed by that content.
And yeah, Zach said be sure to check him out. He's going to have a lot of good content. Now, I'm just trying this overlay style out. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but we're just going to see how it goes for at least one video. But as I said, we're going to talk about some techs first that you can play technically in your deck in order to better your Lugia matchup. And that first card being Flying Pikachu VMAX. Now, we all have seen this card do well. I mean, it won the World Championships, and it's just overall a very good card. The essence behind it is just the fact that for a lightning energy and then a DTE, if you're feeling confident in your opponent not having a V-Guard energy, or 3 energy in general, you can hit for 160 damage, and then during your opponent's next turn, you prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by basics. So with that 160 damage, you are one-shotting a Lugia VSTAR, and in turn making it to where they really don't have any backup attackers unless they want to attack into your Flying Pikachu VMAX and have to deal with weakness again. And the other thing too is that the reason I mentioned the V-Guard is because if you do end up attaching a DTE to the Flying Pikachu, this means that you'll be hitting exactly 280 damage. So providing they don't have a V-Guard attached, that means that you can still knock out the opposing VSTAR Lugias. So Zach, what do you think about this card?
I mean, basically everything you said. I think Pikachu is a really good counter for Lugia, in all honesty, because regardless of what kind of energy they have on the Lugia, you have a form of counterplay to still take the one shot. So without V-Guard, you can play double turbo. With V-Guard, you can play 3 basic energies. And by killing the Lugia, you're then making yourself immune to the deck's primary attackers. So you're almost in essence forcing them to reestablish another Lugia, which is kind of what you want because, as we just talked about, you hit it for weakness. So that's just a favorable price trade for you. And it honestly makes that matchup pretty good if you can set up correctly.
Not to mention too that with the Flying Pikachu, it does have 310 HP, and Lugia has a very hard time hitting those high numbers with things that aren't its basic attackers that don't get buffed from energy like the single strike attackers. So they'll have to 2-shot Lugia, so this should be able to take at least 2 to 4 prizes before going down. But the next card we want to talk about is Duraludon VMAX. Zach, I'll let you start this off.
I mean, it's kind of like the same essence as the Mew counter. Lugia only plays special energy, so the only way that they can get through it is something with like an opposing Duraludon, a single strike Urshifu VMAX, or something that cancels abilities like Path to the Peak or Canceling Cologne. So if you can establish a good enough board and just set this thing up, it can almost effectively wall Lugia, especially since they lost access to playing Amazing Rare Eviltal, which used to be the counter to Duraludon. So Duraludon really can just be that like infinite wall that they really can't get through unless they have the exact right setup.
Yeah, and not to mention that, with the Urshifu too, if you establish a Duraludon and you're able to KO one of their Archeops, as we talked about last week when it comes to certain decks, it makes them have to bench the Urshifu prematurely because they can't power it up enough to KO the Duraludon in one shot, which means it gives you the chance to actually boss it up and KO it. So very good card. And yeah, I think, playing this in a heavy Lugia meta with something like Amazing Rare Yveltal being gone, it means that they really don't have a consistent way of answering it. And the minute that you get rid of something like their Urshifu, it's not there's no real way for them to come back because Urshifu is really their only blow for blow attacker. So the next card is actually a repeating card from last week. This is the Cry of Destruction Yveltal. As we saw, against Mew, when you discard up to 3 energy from your opponent's Pokemon, it's incredibly difficult for them to bounce back from it, especially in a format where there's no way to recover special energy except with a supporter with Roseanne's Research, I believe it is. Is that what it is?
Roseanne's backup. Research was the Diamond and Pearl card.
That's right. Roseanne's backup. They can only get 1 energy back, but most of the time with the Lugia list, they're playing the heavy single strike energy, and all of the other energy counts are about 3. So using a 1 prize attacker to really get rid of everything else that they could potentially swing with, and the single strike energy can come back because of the urn that they play in their list. They usually play up to 3, but being able to get rid of everything else, it usually means that if you're able to do so and they're out of switching cards, you can potentially bring something up and just kind of leave it there and stall your opponent out that way. But let's hear your thoughts on it, Zach.
Man, that Yveltal did me dirty in the Mew video, and it's gonna put up that same kind of pressure against Lugia. If you catch them in the right spot, like you said, you can basically trap them for the rest of the game. This card honestly feels very underrated in the format right now, and it being just a single prize attacker just kind of adds to its value. So you can just slap 2 energies on it, get rid of 3 of your opponent's energies, and then they have to accelerate more energies in play just to take 1 prize. So I feel like it puts on an immense amount of pressure against the right decks.
And finally, the last card. It kind of is the most common knowledge when it comes to playing against Lugia, but we are going to include it just in case you want to up your counts for it. It is Path to the Peak. Now, being a rule box type deck and using VSTAR with Lugia to bring out the 2 Archeops, it really means that if you're able to establish a Path to the Peak and going first, being able to shut off the Lugia, it really makes it to where their turn 2 isn't as constant as they want it to be. Usually they will play a research, discard some Archeops, and just kind of keep going in. And they can still do that, but they need to be able to dig for a counter stadium. And most lists, even though they do play Punkaboo, they usually only play 2 to 3 stadium counters, whether it be 2 stadium and a Punkaboo or 1 stadium and a Punkaboo. There's usually no places where they run 4, so being able to counteract them with the path, it also adds an immense amount of pressure, especially for late game, where if they have things like Luminion out and things like that, you can actually kind of establish your board a little bit better and not have to worry so much about a late game Luminion for boss, because some lists do play 2 now, and they actually can't run. Well, they can run it, but they can't use the effect of the Radiant Serena while this is out, so they can't heal the damage. What do you think, Zach?
Basically what you said. Shutting off that Summoning Star basically shuts off the whole deck. However, not to call you out on your own video, but I do have to correct you. Most licks are actually playing 4 stadium counters. It's usually 3 stadium and 1 Pumpkaboo.
I thought it was 2 and 1.
No, it's usually 2 Mesa Goza, 1 Collapsed, 1 Pumpkaboo. So they do have a lot of outs to the Path to the Peak, but Lugia is known for being a bricky deck, not drawing the greatest. So you kind of capitalize on that, and you don't need the path to stick the whole game. You really only need it to stick those first couple of turns so you can get farther ahead in the tempo, because as soon as those Archeops come out, the gap in board presence just extends so far in their lead that it's almost hard to make it up. So that's kind of what the path is acting like, is just a way to bridge that gap before they get to it. So I think it's honestly a worthwhile inclusion just because Summoning Star is so strong.
Yeah, and not to mention, as you said, just to add on real quick, even if you can, if it doesn't stick, sorry about the dog in the background, even if it doesn't stick, it gives you the time to counteract and get ahead in the game, which means you can potentially even KO the Lugias. And if you can KO, either the one Lugia they have out or two before they have the chance of Summoning Star, it just puts them way behind. But overall, I mean, those are the counters for the deck. They're not real quote-unquote true counters. They're just something that'll, make your matchup percentage more towards your favor rather than your opponent's. But again, none of these are guaranteed. There's always the chance of prizing them or not being able to hit the cards in order to play them, but they are something to potentially look at. But the next cards we'll talk about are actually cards that you can play within Lugia to potentially make your matchup better if you do see these counter cards. First card I'll let Zach talk about, as he did bring it up, but it is Espeon VMAX, as we saw. I think it was it last week that we saw it? Have we talked about it before?
I'm not sure, honestly.
I think it was a couple weeks ago. We talked about playing Espeon to help versus Lost Box, so I'll let you add this in.
We did. Man, this is slowly becoming one of my favorite cards because I think this thing is just super slept on. It feels like it's good both for and against Lugia. One of the interesting things that it provides for Lugia is it makes you immune to Cry of Destruction. So if that card does start seeing a lot of play, just hecking in Espeon, you're good. And then it I mean, that's basically it. Like, it also can protect you from Star Requiem, and that can actually come up a lot because if you have a V-Guard energy on a Lugia, then Lost Impact can't take a one-shot on you. So usually they would probably resort to a Star Requiem. And if you have Espeon in play, then that means you're completely immune to it. And then if you throw something up in the active, like a big VMAX, like Duraludon or Urshifu, that also means that they can't Star Requiem that. And it means that you can get a ton of value out of those big tech VMAXs. So I really do think Espeon is just a super solid card for the format that almost no one is playing with right now.
Yeah, and like you said, Espeon having that ability to just prevent all effects, it takes away things, as you said, like the Star Requiem, and then also being able to take away damage placement from things like the annoying Sableye that every Lost Box plays. And with being able to accelerate energy, you never really have to worry about having the ability to put energy on your Pokemon. The only thing you really have to worry about when you're playing the Espeon is if you want to make it worthwhile and counter something that really does a lot like Sableye, you might want to up your energy count just a little bit, just so that way you have a more diverse energy pool to attach to everything. But again, everything only needs at least one energy if you want to protect everything, but even if it's just the main cards that you want to protect that are your attackers, they only need energy, and Espeon's effect is always active. It doesn't need an energy itself, so very strong card, and the attack is great too, especially in something like the Mirror, just because you can hit the 60x. So I think that's enough for the Espeon. Let's talk about the next card, Duraludon VMAX. Now, we have seen a lot of Lugia lists in the past play Duraludon VMAX. They were kind of on the back and forth train as far as playing the Urshifu or playing the Duraludon. I feel like when it comes to Duraludon, it's very good versus something like the Mirror, just because if they're not able to find the Urshifu, or as we stated before, if you're able to take out an Archeops and they have to bench it prematurely, there's no real way that they can deal with the Skyscraper ability. And also within Duraludon, it makes it to where if you are playing against something like the Pikachu, for instance, Pikachu can't one-shot you. You can't one-shot Pikachu, but if you're able to get the first attack off, there's no real way that they're going to be able to respond to it. And if they have a DTE attached, then they're not taking, they're not doing any damage to you anyways. So they really have to figure out a way to get through it. So I think Duraludon's a very good inclusion. So what do you think?
I think Duraludon's a very good card. I think one of the more underrated aspects of the card that can sometimes go underlooked is the fact that it has a shred style effect. So not only is it doing 220, but it's going through all effects. So that means you can hit through something like a Miltank. Granted, you do play single prize attackers, but if the Duraludon's already prized or set up, then you don't have to worry about trying to set up something else. It also hits Goodra VSTAR for full damage, which Goodra can be a problematic card in general with the healing and the tanking. So just having something that can do big damage and can even actually take a one shot depending on how you build your deck. That is something very crucial in that matchup that you really shouldn't overlook. And then it just, it can wall certain matchups. It can wall the mirror. It can wall Mew. So I think overall it's a very good card. And I would not be surprised if people started playing it again, but I can understand why it's taking the backseat to something like Urshifu right now.
Yeah, especially because Urshifu can hit over the 300 damage and just kind of recycle the energy back and do that consistently. So I can see why it's played. I mean, just like Duraludon too, it's got a lot of HP, so it's tanky. So most of the time you're not going to one-shot it unless there's, weakness involved. But thankfully with Duraludon, there is no weakness, so your opponent has to actually try and commit and hit the 330. And there's no real way they're going to do that unless, there's a Mew VMAX looking at you. But again, you have to the Mew player has to play it right because you do have the skyscraper ability. And then something like Espeon being able to hit that 60 times. But that's really about it. Now, the last two cards that we're going to talk about, we do see some lists playing, well, all lists now playing Serena, but there was a time when Radiant Gardevoir was played. The only reason I would say Radiant Gardevoir over Serena is if there is the inclusions of people playing, the Flying Pikachu. If you have a V-Guard plus the Radiant Gardevoir in play, it means that if they're hitting the 160 damage and don't have a DTE attached on the Pikachu, it means that they're hitting 320 with weakness, but because of the V-Guard and Gardevoir, you actually live with 10 HP left. So this can kind of let you get that last hit in, and then they have to kind of commit a lot to only dealing 10 damage because usually some lists won't play anything that moves damage counters or anything. Most of the time they'll be playing their own Gardevoir. So very good card. The attack will never come into play unless you play Psychic Energy in your Lugia build, but I mean, if you see yourself wanting to use Psychic, you at least have the ability to do so because it does have a double colorless energy requirement, so you can just put a DTE on it. But what do you think, Zach?
Radiant Gardevoir definitely is a very good card. I think the argument for Serena versus Gardevoir is very meta dependent. So I think if you're going into a tournament and you're expecting a lot of Lost Box, then Serena probably is the right call because Serena turns the Cramorant math into a 3-shot, I believe. So that's really important. But if you're expecting a lot of like Arc Mirrors or just V Pokemon in general, then Radiant Gardevoir can save you a lot, especially since in those matchups you're typically going 2 for 2. So if you can, get that extra hit out of, like your Lugia or your Duraludon or something like that, then it can kind of give you that extra leg up and really help you solidify winning that match.
And the last thing that we'll talk about is just kind of a tech. We've seen, Lugia players play it sometimes. It was more so played when Manaphy was big, and we also had the amazing rare Raikou, but it's a canceling clone. This is just good in case, you run into a Duraludon and you want to be able to attack into it without the worry of, I have to set up a big 3-prizer that's, gonna one-shot the Duraludon, but I kind of want to do some early math. There might be some instances in where your single strike energies are prized, so you can't quite hit that 330 mark. So canceling clone just kind of adds that little extra buffer if you run into something like Duraludon. There's not too much to really say about it. It's just kind of a niche card that your opponent might not expect you playing. So is there any last minute things you want to add on the clone?
I think the big thing to highlight is why I played Cologne over Path to the Peak. And it's because you don't want Path to stick. So you'd much rather get the one-turn use out of it, even if it means that, like, you can't take the one-shot. At least you're getting significant damage and you can kind of play around past that. But if you play something like Path to the Peak and your opponent just, lets it sit there, then they could end up benefiting from it more than you can. So I think that's kind of the main reason to play something like Cologne over Path to the Peak.
And not to mention, you know, you can Arven for Cologne plus Belt, which could help your math, but you could also play Irida in your list, which lets you grab the Luminion and also grab the Cologne. And so if you're in an instance where you play 2 Cologne in your deck, you know, you could, if you have 1 Cologne in hand, you could play Irida, grab the fish and another Cologne, use the Cologne, and then if your opponent retreats because they don't want, you know, the Duraludon or anything to be KO'd, you can play the Luminion, grab Boss, Cologne again, and take the KO. So it was a lot more dependent on, you know, if your opponent played Manaphy or not, because again, you could use Amazing Rare Raikou with Manaphy in the active and Cologne in order to take 2 prizes and also KO the Manaphy. So it really comes down to if you want to make room for the list or not. But overall, I mean, it's kind of hard with Lugia because the deck is so dependent on, you know, accelerating energy. And especially now with a lot of the energy types being rotated or special energy types, there's no real way to kind of build and capitalize off of it. So this is kind of the best we could do. If this video was out probably, you know, 2-3 months ago before rotation, there'd be a lot more to talk about. But as for right now, this is kind of where we're at. Now things might shake up with Paldea Evolved, but I don't see too much coming out from it. But there are a bunch of new decks, so those should be fun to look into. So I want to thank you guys so much for watching today's video. If you did enjoy it, smash that like button, subscribe, turn on post notifications. As always, thank you, Zach, for helping me. I really appreciate it. Is there any last things you want to say?
I do actually want to say that I think Lugia gets kind of a new breath of life with Paldea Evolved. We get a lot of new special energies, and it doesn't really change up the single strike variant, but you actually can play a couple different new variants. So I would definitely say for all you Lugia enthusiasts out there, explore the new special energies and what they can do, because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But as far as, you know, me in general, you know, like Tyler said, my name's Zach. As I mentioned before, you know, I do have my own YouTube channel that I'm trying to start up. It's called Best of 3 TCG. Got a lot of fun series planned out for that. Hoping to get the content out soon. So please come and stop by. I guarantee you will not regret it.
All right. I'll catch you guys in tomorrow's What to Buy Wednesday. But other than that, thank you again for watching. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow.